resumes are kind of now becoming a little bit carbon copies of each other. So it's a little harder to distinguish them, and they all look more or less perfect. And especially they use AI to tailor their resumes. I mean, if anything, they can use the tool, or they're capable of using AI for work related tasks. Fantastic. We don't want AI to repeat mistakes that humans make. That's the area that's probably going to be lagging until humans become perfect, which is never going to happen.
Vadim, thank you so much for joining us on the Objective Hiring podcast. Really looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim, for having me. Excited to be here.
Right. Well, I'd love to start with just in-your-face question. Is the hiring for data roles broken fundamentally? If so, how do you think we could solve this broken mess?
In my opinion, I always think about these changes or fundamental changes that are happening in the industry as impetus to a quick adjustment on our end rather than something being broken. So it's unfinished. It's an unfinished project or work in progress. So I think with recruitment is similar. Definitely changed a lot when it comes to both the applicants and the recruitment process. I know we started using AI to screen resumes faster. I know that we have applicants who are applying using the software to about 100 positions at a time. So it allows you quickly to distribute your resumes quickly, to tailor your resumes to the positions. So it's in my opinion, increasing the efficiency dramatically. Now, whether it's broken or not, it's probably even more so sensitive on the candidate side because they get kind of the brunt of some companies trying to advertise their positions while the position is not actually posted internally. And in that way, that might seem very broken. So while the process is just getting more and more efficient, what's happening in the market definitely may seem daunting to those who may be, especially to those who are maybe in the job market for the first time, recent graduates, folks who are trying to find their internships, and they're kind of in that very, very new way of doing things in the recruitment market, and they're looking into best advice columns and finding that these pieces of advice are not applicable anymore in this market. So I would say it's very different, and there would be an adjustment period, but hopefully it's not as broken as some people may think it is.
Yeah, I think that's a nice reframing of the problem anyway, to think of it as imperfect and we can make it better rather than it's fundamentally flawed and we need to burn it down and start again. That's probably a healthier way to think about it anyway.
Right. And you guys probably see that too. I mean, things that you've done differently in the past now, they are more efficient, but they are also maybe unfamiliar at times. And that's part of the process. I'm sure you face that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm interested in drilling down on one thing you mentioned around candidates applying en masse to different roles. So, one consequence I wonder of that approach might be that for each role a candidate has applied to, it's kind of like they've got less skin in the game because they've applied to it at almost zero marginal cost. That's certainly some feedback we're getting from some companies. They feel like any candidate who's applied to their job has a little bit lower engagement than what they would have had in the past. Sorry, is that something you've found yourself?
I've seen a few resumes recently, and I would say those resumes were so specifically tailored to our needs and our position and job description, because we typically look either for a specific software or maybe a specific subset of skills that fills the exact need that we have. That usually when I review those resumes, they'd have such a level of specificity in it that it's harder to fake. So maybe in that regard, there's still effort that I'm seeing in the resumes I'm reviewing. Now, I'm thinking if you are a generalist and your position is maybe more broad, then it's easier to fill out in a way where it's more palatable to recruiters. I mean, as long as the candidate is not lying, or as long as they are being honest on their resume, typically in the first few minutes of the conversation, even with HR, which in our case we give them technical questions, and they would ask those technical questions from the get-go, so they would get that information out even before we start recruiting for the position internally. Um, it's I would say all in all, it's much harder to sort of fake it if the recruiting team knows what they're looking for. With that being said, what I've heard outside of my team, that a lot of resumes started to look very similar, and this is something that I personally cannot attest to, maybe because it's a little different for us when it comes to what we are looking for. But my friends and other colleagues in the industry did say that resumes are kind of now becoming a little bit carbon copies of each other. So it's a little harder to distinguish them, and they all look more or less perfect. And especially they use AI to tailor their resumes. So it's becoming harder. I would say the solution to that is creating a very, very tailored position, or a very tailored list of requirements if we're able to, and if you're in the technical field, at least that's the remedy that we found to be effective.
Because then that meant any candidates who did fit that very specific set of requirements, you felt like is more likely to be real, because you can't just apply en masse to a generic looking role because your role is so specific. Is that
Right, right. And one example is we hired recently a tag manager role, and that was highly tailored to code collection of the data on the page, and that had those very, very specific questions that we put out on our website related to a specific platform for tag management. So really, unless you are in the field and you've done that, you wouldn't know how to fill it out. Or if you are, then you're totally lying, and that would be found out in the first 5 minutes of the call. So that also kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what comes out in the metrics around conversion rates in that first interview, because one thing I'm hearing is exactly what you've said, which is, okay, the CVs are now looking more uniform, and a lot of candidates are probably using ChatGPT to optimize their CV at some level. But I wonder whether, if part of the process of either writing or updating a CV, you've now, or a candidate is now outsourced to a large language model, which are going to make up whatever they need to make up to fit the CV to the job description, like if that's its task. The odds of them making up something that's not truthful is like they're going to say something. I wonder if a candidate can now disassociate from that a little bit, because it's not their lie they've sat down there and written on a CV. It's an hallucination, I love that euphemism, that the large language model has come up with. So I wonder whether the sort of truth score of a CV might be about to drop a lot, because candidates no longer have had to commit to writing that lie themselves or that exaggeration. They've sort of outsourced the morality of that to a large language model. What do you reckon?
Totally. And there's evidence of that, and there are little tiny things, especially when it comes to skills folks add. SQL, Python, maybe when they're not necessarily versed well, but it seems like the resume is tailored better with these skills included. And there's the resume inflation, and I've seen candidates including these skills when they're not necessarily proficient in them once we actually interview them. And definitely it's something small, especially when it comes to the skills, that can just slip in, or a platform, and that happens a lot. With that said, I'm not against using AI to tailor resumes, not at all. I think and even, I mean, it's hard to be 100% sure whether the resume was tailored by AI, or doctored by AI or not. But even if we see signs of AI in the resume, to me, it's not necessarily a red flag. I mean, if anything, they can use the tool or they're capable of using AI for work-related tasks. Fantastic. I mean, I'm all for it. Please do it. Please go ahead. If they're not diligent enough to then check the work of AI afterwards or after the fact and validate, which is a very important part of working with AI, then you would see lots of these resumes with slightly inflated skills in them.
Is there any bit of the hiring process that you would feel uncomfortable in candidates leveraging AI? So you mentioned CV optimization. Let's say it's fine as long as they, as you say, validate the output and they still kind of own it. But is there any limits to where they should or should not be using these tools in the hiring process, in your opinion?
I love this question. I think in answering the first part of your question, the frightening, probably most frightening, is a live responder. You're asking the interviewer questions about something technical, and it's AI answering, so it's not real answers, and that's pretty frightening because basically everything that we're trying to suss out, if the person has critical thinking, if they can solve the problem, and if AI is capable of doing it for them, then it kind of defeats the purpose of the interviewer. So that's probably the most frightening component of it, at least to me. I haven't seen people successfully using it, and I had candidates who would, and when we would ask a very technical question, they would just pull up the screen. They would say, "I'm going to share the screen, and I'm going to live do it," and they show it. They literally, and that's probably the strongest thing as the job seeker you can do. If you are being asked a technical question, that you just show your screen and you whip out your keyboard and you type away and you show that you can do it, or even parts of it. And that's impossible to fake, at least to date. I don't know, maybe in a few months that would be a little different, but something like that is not is definitely not produced by AI yet. Anything else outside of live interview, I personally don't, unless there's unethical information that a candidate is trying to get, which is probably an exception to this rule. I would say if it's not deceiving, it's assisting, then yes, go ahead and use AI to enhance your resume. Yes, go ahead, use AI to look through your LinkedIn page. Yes, have AI generate questions for you for the interview to practice, give it answers, solicit feedback. Use it. I personally think it's an amazing tool and can help in so many ways to get better. So in a way, if everyone is going to use AI, I think it's going to also raise the standard of the interviewers. So I see a lot of positive in it.
Yeah, and for candidates competing with other candidates, you wouldn't want to be the one person not using this like borderline magical tool if everyone else is using it to their advantage. So, you know, you'd better use it at some level where it helps you. I think maybe there's some scenarios where it might actually dilute quality in some situations, like because I find that the kind of tone and general type of content it would produce would be quite similar to each other. And so if you wanted to have a really aggressive, creative approach to break out from the norm, then maybe using the tool that everyone else is using might not work. But that's probably, again, a minority of use cases where you'd need to do that, I suppose.
Totally. Have you faced something that would stick out to you as AI, or you would feel cautious about it and sort of step away?
Yes. Very specifically, two scenarios I can think of recently. One was when we were hiring sales development people into Alooba. And as part of our evaluation process, we asked a question, which was, imagine it's day one for you in Alooba, like you got successfully hired. What are the three things that you would need from us to give you the best chance of being successful in your role? So it's a very personal question that I wanted to know this individual person's opinion. And what I did was, because we asked this to many candidates, I could then extract that data, do an aggregation, and then that gave me like a data-driven onboarding document because I knew, oh, well, 80% of people want to know what their goals are in week one. Great, so we should have that. 50% of people knew what wanted to have like a one-on-one with me. Okay, great, so we'll have that. So it was such an interesting information collecting exercise for me to create an onboarding document. But what I found strange was that so many candidates had clearly just copied and pasted that into ChatGPT. So I wasn't getting their views. I was getting ChatGPT's views. I do not give a shit what ChatGPT wants to do on day one or week one at Alooba. I get what the person thinks. And so I found that to be quite weird. But then, to be fair, I was mentioning this to someone, and their pushback was like, well, yeah, but they might have thought this was actually part of the evaluation process where they were being graded on their answers to this question, which they weren't. But I could see how, given where we used it in the hiring process, they might have then thought, oh, well, I better not be truthful, or I better get ChatGPT to answer this for me.
No, I can see that. Maybe they're trying to just be best and make sure they don't say anything out of pocket. But yes, I can see how it's frustrating that someone would have then just sympathize and put out that way.
The other area I saw it which left a slightly bitter taste in my mouth was someone who was passing off their own original effort and thoughts as ChatGPT works. So someone had said, oh, I took the weekend to put together this sales strategy for you, just, to show you that I'm kind of extra keen and motivated, which would be an amazing and unrequired flex of a candidate to put in that level of effort. But you shouldn't do that claiming that, because I feel like what they were pitching was the effort they went into. Like, I've gone and spent hours doing this thing where you didn't ask me to do it to show how motivated and keen I am, which is fair enough. But if you've just put in one prompt to ChatGPT and produce the output, then it's not really the same thing. The end outcome might be the same, but if the thing you're pitching is the effort, then I feel like that was a bit disingenuous personally. So it wasn't really about the use of the tool. It was more like misrepresentation of how you'd use the tool compared to your own effort. So I thought that was a bridge too far, personally.
I hear you. Yeah, I guess it goes back to the issue of trust, and that's kind of a separate human component, but totally hear you. Yes.
For the live interview itself, yeah, I feel like at the moment for candidates trying to use ChatGPT in that, they'll probably come unstuck, because I would have thought it's a lot more cognitively difficult to be reading output of a large language model, listen to what the interviewer is saying, present your thoughts. That's who can do all those things at the same time. You're probably better off if you actually have the skills and experience just answering the interviewer questions directly yourself, especially because it's going to be very difficult for you to read the output of a large language model and put it back into normal English sounding without that sounding like a robot. So for candidates who are trying to hack a live interview, I feel like that would be making the life more difficult, not easier.
It would be hard, but it would help if you have highly specific questions. And if you're doing that live, not necessarily just copying and pasting, you're actually taking that information in live. And if the question is very specific and asking, what's the difference between the custom dimension and custom event, things like that, then that you are in the data collection management field, but the AI tool can give you a quick answer too, if you know.
Yeah, no, that's a fair use case. Yeah. That wouldn't be that hard to then translate back into normal English. I wonder if, so you mentioned before around a candidate proactively sharing their screen, showing you their work and how solving the problem, which at the moment is unfakeable. And that's like, oh, cool, they actually know what they're doing. I wonder if we're going to get to a point pretty soon where it's just accepted that candidates are going to use a large language model, especially because we need them to use them in the job because it's this amazing efficiency enhancer. And so they would be, maybe part of the evaluation would be, okay, well, I know you're going to solve this SQL problem with ChatGPT to begin with, and you're going to edit it. Okay, share with me your ChatGPT screen. What's your prompt? Like, why did you write the prompt this way? How did you then verify the output? How did you validate it? Maybe it would just be brought to the fore under the realization that probably candidates using it anyway, instead of trying to sort of pretend like they're not and hide over it and all those kinds of things. Can you imagine that taking place? What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I mean, to me, what's important is, can you solve the problem? Can you find the answer? And if you can, if there's a way, sure, it's perfectly fine. When we had the assessments, so one of the stages of our review process includes assessments. We give homework, so we let people use their own pace. And I mean, there are time limits for exercises that they use, but still, these are the exercises that we don't test folks live on. We could let them do that at their own pace, and if they can find the solution, that's great. And usually, with coding, ChatGPT or other AI tools are not always as great, especially with small problems. So usually you would be able to see if the logic or if it's AI produced. But again, in the past, you could ask a friend, right, to help you with the home assignment, or you had students and teachers trying to solve something together, even live. So it was always there. And I think as long as you can solve the problem on the job day in and day out, not only during the interview, then use AI tool is perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, we used it lately with the data science team. We were picking apart the formula of the statistical testing, and we used ChatGPT for it. It just saved us a lot of time and a lot of research. It just told us that that's the binomial distribution, and then we went from there. So it's a time saver, and it's a huge helper.
I wonder also, thinking about the use of these tools, whether or not the expected skill set of the candidates is going to change through time, in the sense that maybe, let's say, I don't know, writing SQL and Python code from scratch may now be a bit old hat, and you now feed in a prompt, it then writes the code for you. You still have to unpack it and validate it at the moment. Maybe that will also change. I wonder if the blend of skills that a data professional might need is going to be different. Like, will some of the basic technical things be now AI driven, so that you need more the soft skills, or vice versa? Like, how do you imagine these skills are going to develop in terms of what a data person actually needs?
There are courses now on prompt generation. I think the quote that I like the most is that the most common programming language of the future is English. I think a lot of the existing prompt calculations and even ATL code pieces are going to be written in English. Therefore, comprehension and the ability to express yourself clearly would be paramount, which in turn would mean, yes, those soft skills are going to be very useful for highly technical positions. And that's that was not the case for a while, because we had the technical skills, and then we had sales people in the front end with more soft skills. But now, if you're able to express yourself, if you're able to describe the problem accurately, you'll be able to get your answer faster. So I think that gap between the soft skills and hard skills is going to be more blended over time, and you would certainly make a lot of use of soft skills in the future, just as much as hard skills for those highly technical jobs.
And I wonder whether maybe the slight caveat to that would be, if now people have access to what is a technical product like ChatGPT or other large language model or any other AI products, whether now some people who are more on the soft skill side of things, maybe they need to understand at least at some level how these tools work to use them properly. So maybe there's like an additional new technical skill, like understanding AI, for example, as opposed to the speaking to AI to get it to do what you want to do. Maybe there's like, yeah, an emerging technical skill set as well, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and it's also the filtering skill. Sometimes every once in a while, the AI is going to just spit out garbage, and you kind of need to get used to critical thinking and always analyzing. Does it make sense? Does it make logical sense? do I need to throw in another prompt saying, can you break it down step by step so I can actually suss out the logical information out of it and not get the final result? So um, critical thinking is still going to be there for all of us, unfortunately. So AI probably will not solve for every equation. Not at the moment, at least.
Not yet. We're still in a job at the moment, but time will tell what AI can do. Hopefully, it can automate away the shitty bits of our roles. We can do something that's higher value add. Um, in hiring, I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for AI to be used to improve things at various bits of the process. Personally, I feel like the way traditional hiring is done can be very biased, can be open to a lot of potential bias and discrimination. Yet, in the narrative and conversation around AI, one of the main question marks that people fair enough have is, oh, AI could be used in a very biased way, or it could be based on biased training data. Um, uh, but I feel like in the hiring case in particular, the current way we do things is so already biased that maybe how could AI make it any worse? And so I'll give you an example. There have been a lot of experiments done around the world, different markets, where the researchers have tried to investigate, is there any kind of bias against people from a certain background when they're applying for roles? And so one that was done in Australia a couple of years ago by the University of Sydney was they got something like 10,000 different CVs, split them into 3 buckets. The CVs were similar across the buckets in terms of their experience and their background and their skills and the this and the that. The only real difference between the 3 sets of CVs was on the first one, the first name was Anglo, surname was Anglo, sorry. Second group, first name, Anglo, surname, Chinese. Third group, Chinese first and last name. And so then they applied to tens of thousands of roles in Sydney and Melbourne, different seniorities, different domains, different industries, like controlled for so many variables, and then measured the rate at which those applications got a callback, either through a literal phone call or an email or whatever. And so for the first group that had the Anglo first and surname, that group got a 12% callback. As the third group, which had the Chinese first and last name, got only a 4% callback. So all else equal, if you applied to a role in Australia with a Chinese name, you have only 1/3 the chance of getting a callback for a job, which, you could probably start to investigate the exact mechanics of how they did the experiment, but it seemed pretty legitimate to me. They thought of a lot of obvious variables around it, number of years of experience and education and all these kinds of things. Like, it seemed legit. And I've seen similar results in other markets in the United States and England with different subpopulations as well. And so I feel like, there's already a lot of bias in the process. Is there then maybe an opportunity for AI to improve this, in your view, to kind of get rid of some of these systemic issues that we've seen for a long time?
I like this question. I mean, we have similar research here in the States. I mean, it's that specific names get fewer callbacks. And that's been a problem for a while. There's been a few attempts to solve it, including resume without names and just looking specifically at skills, so letting the automation kind of pick apart the resume and only present it in the set of paragraphs about the experience and the education, as opposed to looking at it as a traditional resume PDFs. With AI, what's been reported, what I've read too, is that AI tends to replicate implicit bias because what we put in, we have out. And using AI can be pretty dangerous because you are doomed to make the same mistakes that people make unconsciously. And really, that means that I think recruiters need to be especially careful with using AI for these kinds of assessments, because these AIs might be replicating the same biases and the same mistakes that humans might be doing. What we try to do is isolate both the postings and assessments to specific skill tests, and that requires probably a human approach until maybe we reach a point when all humans are clear of implicit bias, which I don't know, isn't going to happen. Probably not. It's just human nature to generalize and label. But until then, I think it's very important for recruiters to do that manually to make sure that the postings that they have don't have gender specific language. And then obviously during the interviewing stage, everyone is going to be taking the same assessments. Everyone is going to have the same time. And if someone needs to be accommodated for a disability, that's also something that needs to be provided. So I do think this is probably a place where a lot of scrutiny is still necessary.
So you're saying this is still a place that scrutiny is very much warranted, basically.
Totally. And mostly because we don't want AI to repeat mistakes that humans make, and that's the area that's probably going to be lagging until humans become perfect, which is never going to happen.
No, it's not. I wonder whether for the screening case in particular, so there's some, if we take just CV screening as a stage in the process, which itself might be almost redundant now if, as you say, all these CVs start to look the same, if maybe there's so it's like an inability to choose among a similarly good looking set of CVs, then that's an issue. Maybe there's more hallucinations or maybe exaggerations on the CV. So maybe the CV itself is less valuable than it was before, which in my opinion was not very valuable. But if we had, let's say, an AI doing that CV screening step, I feel like we could solve the bias problem. Wouldn't be that challenging in the sense that we wouldn't be asking the AI, hey, give me other CVs like our current employees, or give me other CVs like here's these 1,000 LinkedIn profiles of current data analysts who look good. Because you're right, and that would inherently just be biased. If it was like a two-step process to say, well, here's the CV, extract for me all the skills and experiences compared to this job description. Step one. All right, now I've got like the structured data from an unstructured data. Okay, now rank this, like how strong does this skill seem? How strong does this experience seem? And then just come up with some kind of CV score. Maybe that would then be the way to avoid the bias. Because by the point it's doing that evaluation, it doesn't have any other information to base it on. What do you think?
Totally, Tim. I think it depends on what kind of questions you're asking. So if your questions are around the specific skills and just extracting the data, so AI is doing ETL, that's, I think, a perfect use case. But then if you were to ask, hey, ChatGPT, do you think this candidate would be a good fit for the role? You might want to be a little careful with questions like that. But that's probably, so your prompts are good examples of what you could use the AI for. So I agree with you there.
Yeah, and I guess this is the take home of learning how to write these prompts well, because in theory that prompt might work well, but the nature of the large language models is I might try that and it might get derailed for some reason or another. And this is also, I guess, changing with different models and different updates. You can see that the output tends to change quite dramatically.
Totally. There are probably going to be guides on what kind of questions to ask and not to ask once AI is still a part of the recruitment process. But I'm with you, and probably a lot of filtering of that information once it's spit out by AI.
So we're talking about AI CV screening, maybe some ways to make it unbiased, but you also touched on existing ways to make the hiring process in general more fair, nothing to do with AI. And you mentioned having this kind of structured approach where candidates can ask the same questions over the same amount of time. Can you unpack why you have that approach and how it helps make the hiring process fairer?
Totally. That's the approach that I take with the candidates. Typically, I structured these in the format of a case study so that A, tests your critical thinking, and B, can you solve the problem from the point A to point B. I also can vet, if I ask different questions to every candidate, my questions sometimes might not be perfect. So if every single candidate asks me additional follow-up questions to clear things up, and these questions are very similar. It means something is wrong with my question, or my question is not very clear. So that eliminates that issue. If I were to maybe just throw different questions at other candidates, maybe some of them are just going to be more lucky with some of them and less lucky with the other. Definitely with notes, especially notes to HR, it's helpful to have similar tasks. And the reason I'm using a similar set of questions is during the screening process, the HR department that passes the candidates to me asks these technical questions during the initial stage of the interview. And they collect these specific questions from me, so that this is usually a set of 3 to 5 questions when they ask those to the candidate. And if the candidate is completely lost, then that would save me time, and I would have to interview that person, because HR can not just interview them for a cultural fit, but they can also just put these questions out. So that's definitely efficient and easy to compare. And then with technical assessment, also, I think we're trying to be as fair as possible. Previously, we had we kind of have a democracy on the team in that order. Or I like to think we have a democracy on the team where we get to vote on the candidates, and we had candidates complete SQL assignments, and then we literally looked at them side by side. Sometimes, I mean, SQL code, there are different ways to code things. So you can have shorter snippet of code, maybe a more intricate one, but the goal is to solve the problem. And then our team would vote on which assignment they would think is stronger. And those so efficient. I mean, with the team voting on candidates, probably one of the best things that we do during the recruitment process, because it's the team gets to know the candidate, and whichever candidate gets the highest number of votes gets the offer. So that's pretty much been the process. So in that case, we're trying to make sure that the assignments are comparable, and that allows us for this voting system to be in place.
That's such a fascinating way to do it, because not only have you made it, as you say, comparable, because you've had consistent stages and timing and questions and tasks, but then you've added this kind of data-driven element and a democratic element, as you say. And you must also then get buy-in, because that person's joining the team based on their peers having selected them, at least at some level. So they can't really complain, can they? They've been invested in the process. I wonder if that also makes them receive the candidate more warmly, rather than if they had no skin in the game at all. What do you reckon?
Totally. I mean, it was different. There were times when I would send the candidate to the team and say, "Hey, have your own interview," and they would reject the candidate, and I would have to find someone new because the team doesn't like them. And there would be a time when we would vote on the candidates, and I would get outvoted. I would vote for one candidate, and then the team would vote for a different candidate, and they would win. And you know what? Like 10 out of 10, the decision of the majority of the team was better than mine, because there's been a couple of times when I would think, I don't know if this candidate is gonna do well, but then I would be in the minority, and I would still hire, because that's kind of the process and the promise of the democracy. And I would think, oh, hell yeah, I'm glad we did that, because you know what, the team had a better sense of smell and a better screening process that maybe I would have had. So that it kind of works, which is very, very unusual. But I found it to be very efficient to kind of trust the team. If I already have a strong team and they know what they're doing and I can trust them, then why wouldn't I trust them to make the right decision about the candidate? So that's it. It will somehow it works, and I've been pretty happy about it.
Somehow it works. I feel like that's the tagline for democracy that the Greeks probably built a few thousand years ago.
Totally. It's never perfect, but it works somehow. I love it.
Yes. Okay, that's a great, great method you've come up with. And what I feel like I should also throw at you is the devil's advocate of what I would normally hear if I'm talking to people who would like to follow a very unstructured approach. And so you've laid out this set of steps a candidate goes through. It's consistent. You mentioned, asking questions in a consistent way. Something as simple as that. If you ask different questions to different candidates, then of course they've had a different experience. Some people, if I mention the structured approach to them, would say, "Oh, it's too rigid." Then interviewing can become like a box ticking exercise. And someone gave a particular example of where the structured approach had maybe gone slightly too far when they'd applied to a FANG company of 6 months ago or so. And the questions were predefined in advance. I think the candidates even got emailed the questions, but then they'd been leaked on the internet. So then each interviewer knew that the candidates have already prepared answers to all these questions. Therefore, these questions are pointless. Therefore, I'm going to ask whatever I want. And so it was this weird circularity where they'd gone too far, and then the interviewers would go, "Well, this is stupid." And so, the general pushback I get is around it's like too rigid. And if it's too rigid, you don't give a candidate an opportunity to really shine. That's the perception I get. What do you think about that kind of devil's advocate? Does that have some merit, or are they missing the upside of having the structured approach?
I think it has some merit. I think a lot of companies now have 5, 7 stages, 8 stages during the recruitment process. And the question is, why? What are you going to learn at stage 6 that you didn't learn at stage 5? To me, if you're overcomplicating the process in the name of structure, then you probably are wasting time, to be completely fair. And if it's completely unstructured, I would personally lose my mind. This sounds insane. How would I compare them? How would I have my notes for HR? How is HR getting into the speech? Just not like not my style. I cannot do that. It needs to have check boxes, and it needs to have a process. But I mean, in a way, checking boxes is a part of it. I think these are maybe boring things, but very, very important. If you want to find the right candidate. It's sort of mundane things like brushing your teeth and making your bed. It sucks. We all do that, and I don't think it's good enough of an excuse to thwart that process in the name of that being boring or too rigid. I also, when I'm looking for a very specific candidate, it's boring sometimes to interview the same folks over and over again and ask similar questions and have same sets of assessments, but you sit down and you do it and you do it right, and then you get the best candidates that way. Maybe it's a very orthodox way of thinking about it, but that's the way I approach that at times. Otherwise, I feel like everything is in the air and you are making wrong decisions because, again, maybe my question was structured and unfairly, or we're just playing wrong, and I missed that good candidate who was just unlucky, and we want to avoid that as much as possible.
Yeah, so embrace the boredom of it, embrace the sort of atomic habits of just doing each of the small steps really, really well, and approaching it with at least a basic scientific way of saying, I'm going to try to measure some things and set up some objective criteria and then select the candidate who does best. And that is going to end up in a better result than the complete chaos of just winging it throughout the whole process and picking a random winner, I guess.
That's my way of thinking about it. Maybe there are some others who would prefer something else, but I think reviewing the process first, if you have 10 steps, toss out steps that don't make any sense or that don't have any difference historically in the number of candidates that got weed out from the process. And once you have a good process in place that everyone agreed on, then just follow it to the T. Again, maybe if we were in the creative industry, the answer would have been very different, and people would be throwing tomatoes at me. But I think it works in the technical industries.
Well, Vadim, it's been a fascinating and wide-ranging conversation today. Thank you so much for joining us on the Objective Hiring Show.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun. Thank you, Tim. Talk to you soon.